Okay, hello lowercase h2. This is going to be the first of our history lessons on the Iron Age. So our learning objective for today is going to be to learn to develop a chronologically secure knowledge of prehistory. Now there's some big words in there, and strangely Iron Age isn't one of them. The first big word is chronology, or chronologically. That means to do with time. Chrono means time. So a chronologically secure knowledge of prehistory is to understand how prehistory fits together in time. The other big word there is prehistory, and that needs a little bit of discussion. So here's our question. What is prehistory? Well, I would normally start by showing you any time period by doing a timeline. And this is quite tricky for this one, because prehistory starts with the very first human beings, or the very first things that are a bit like human beings. And that is a very long time ago. It's millions of years ago. That gives us a bit of a problem, because prehistory stops with the point at which people start writing things down. So having written language and writing things down is normally our stop point for prehistory. That's when history starts. But this time period, well, first of all, it's really big. And secondly, it's different depending on where you are in the world, because different people in different places invented writing or found out about writing at different times. Drawing a timeline would be a bit of a nightmare. I'll come back to him in a second. Can I go backwards? Yeah, so this is a timeline that's up in my classroom, and I think there's probably one in all of the classrooms, all of our low key stage 2 classrooms. It's a timeline that's got, I think, 10 years to a centimetre, so every millimetre is a year in that timeline. It's quite a good timeline. We've got the Iron Age, which is the bit that we're going to be learning about. We've got Roman Britain, the Saxons and Vikings, which is the early medieval, early modern, and contemporary history, and everything's the right size. It's the right number of years, with a year being a millimetre. The problem is, if we tried to put Bronze Age on that, it would be a few metres long. And if we tried to put the age that comes before it, which is the Stone Age, well, our timeline would link to Aldi. It would have to be so long, it would come out of our school and it would have to go all the way across Grove Hill to the Aldi shop. It's about the same distance as from our school to Astley Cooper. Obviously, that's far too big to draw as a timeline, and there is no way that you can draw that in your book. But we need to do something to help us split history up. Now, if I can go back to this chap here. He was an archaeologist. So his name's Christian Jurgensen Thompson, and he was an archaeologist, or a very early archaeologist and historian. And he was one of the first people to try and split up that bit of history that goes from the very first people that ever developed millions of years ago, all the way up to the Romans, which is basically the point at which, at least in Britain, we had written history. That's a massively long period of time. And he decided to split time up into the tools which people had been using. And there were three main types of materials that people used. People used stone, and then people started to use metal. To begin with, they used bronze, and then they used iron. And because generally people used stone first, and then they used stone and bronze, and then they used stone and bronze and iron, he decided to name the ages after each of those materials. It's a good plan, it's not a brilliant plan. For a start, people used stone for a very long time. So even by splitting the timeline up, like we saw, our Stone Age bit is so big on our timeline, it goes to little. The Bronze Age is massive, and the Iron Age is still quite a big one. But it's better than we had before that point. So let's go to here. Now, this is a timeline of prehistory, of prehistoric times, but it's not done to scale. So 50,000 years ago, people moving into Britain, or very early people moving into Britain. And then as time moved on, various things happened, various important things happened. Cave paintings, remains of humans being found in different places. Important one here, farming, more developments in farming. Interestingly, it's not until this point here that Britain is even an island. At that point, we're still joined to France by a piece of land. We don't have the English Channel yet. Now, let's move on to our next section. So, the first of those ages is the Stone Age. Now, the Stone Age is so big that modern historians and modern archaeologists probably shouldn't use the word historians because it's prehistory, but it's a good word. So modern archaeologists and historian type people have split the Stone Age into 3 bits. So they call the early Stone Age the Paleolithic, they call the middle Stone Age the Mesolithic, and they call the later Stone Age, the new Stone Age, the Neolithic. So for that first time period, people were hunter-gatherers. Now, hunter-gatherers means they don't stay in one place. To get their food, they have to go and find it. They have to go and search bushes for berries, search trees for fruit, and hunt animals to eat them. And if you run out of food because you've eaten all the berries in an area, or all the animals have been eaten, or the animals have moved on, you have to then go somewhere else and get to find a new source of food. So these people move around from place to place. This is going to be important later when we start looking at their houses. You need to think, if you're moving around, what does your house have to be like? Then we have the Middle Stone Age. This comes after the last Ice Age, which is when it got incredibly cold in Britain, when Britain was almost half frozen over by glaciers and ice. But after that age, we get the Mesolithic, and this is when Britain first becomes an island. Tools, the stone tools that people were using earlier, become better. They become smaller and they become finer. That means people can make better things. They can invent canoes and they can go fishing. They can hunt for animals better. They're still hunter-gatherers, but they're doing a better job of being hunter-gatherers, and they've got the tools to build better houses, and, well, houses is probably a stretch, better places to live. And then we have the Late Stone Age, which is the Neolithic. This was really important because it was in the Neolithic that people learned to become farmers. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing can be a whole lesson on its own. But becoming a farmer changed things amazingly. For a start, you know where your animals are and you know where your plants are because you planted them, or you looked after them, you built fences around them. You haven't got to travel around. That means you can build houses that are going to be there for as long as you want them, houses that stay in one place. This is very important. But we're not learning about the Stone Age, I said the Iron Age. So let's see what comes next. It's the Bronze Age. So the Bronze Age starts when people learn how to extract metal from rocks. That means certain rocks have got metal ore in them. And we'll learn more about that in the science lessons that Mr. Jarman's doing, I think. Because to get that metal out, you have to melt it, you have to extract it, you have to do things to it. But the nice thing about bronze, which is when you mix different metals together, is you can make a material that is much better for tools. You can cast it, which means you can pour it into molds and make different shapes. You can beat it and you can bend it. You can do things that you can't do with a stone. It means that people can build better tools for agriculture. That means they can be better farmers. Unfortunately, it also means they can produce better weapons and they can produce jewellery. It's at this point that people start burying people when they die and having very elaborate ceremonies and putting important things with them and building these barrows, which are kind of like mounds over the top of somebody's grave. People have got a bit more spare time on their hands because it's easier to grow the food because they've got tools. And because we can find these objects, we start to know a bit more what life was like in the Bronze Age. So the Bronze Age is very important, but we're not doing the Bronze Age, we are doing the Iron Age. Now, in the Iron Age, people learned how to use iron. Now, this is very important because there's a lot more iron laying around, or iron ore, and it's much easier to get at. So bronze is expensive, takes a lot of time to find it, it's quite deep down and it's quite hard to work. Iron, at the time, you could just find laying around on the floor. Yes, you had to work it, but it was cheaper. That means iron, whereas bronze is only for the richest people and you only use it to make important things, iron can be used by pretty much everybody. Everybody could have something made out of iron. Bronze is still used, but like I said, it's expensive. Iron makes better tools for agriculture. For farming, you can have more of them. You can make better ploughs, you can dig deeper holes. Because you're now better at farming, you can feed more people. So populations, which means the number of people in an area, begins to rise. People start to live in tribes, large groups of families, rather than just being a family that has to move around and can only feed themselves and can't afford to feed anybody else. The problem with tribes is they got habits of going to war with each other. It's in this period that people start to build hill forts, which we'll talk about in a later lesson, and they build these groups of round houses. Notice that word. It's round houses in Celtic times, in Bronze Age times as well, but they're still round houses in Iron Age. Remember that for later on. They're still farming the land, and perhaps they're starting to build stone walls around it. Note that we're still using stone, both for building and probably for other things as well. Stone's still there. You don't stop using something just because you've got something newer and better. We live in an age now when we use plastic, but we still use metal for things. So during this Iron Age, Britain became more sophisticated. We could spend more time doing art and music, and we find beautiful pieces of art and pieces of jewellery, and we know from other things that we'll talk about later that they're developing music as well. Now, sometimes these people are called the Celts in Britain. In fact, they're called the Celts through a lot of Europe. Historians don't think this was a term that was used until quite recently, but it gives us a good word to use in the short term. In Britain, the Iron Age ends very abruptly in AD 43, because when in AD 43 the Romans invaded Britain, and with them they brought people that could write. And there are probably some people that could write in the Iron Age Britain towards the end, but not many of them. They didn't write much down. The moment the Romans came along, they wrote things. The moment you write things, that means that history starts. Prehistory ends, history starts. So our topic is going to run from the point at which iron comes along and starts replacing bronze as the main material, and it's going to end in the Roman times. But like I said, it's incredibly difficult for me to ask you to do a timeline, which is the first thing I would normally do. But we still need to do something to try and get in your head how things changed during that time period. So I thought what we would do is we will look at houses. What I've got here is 6 pictures of houses. One of them is a house from Paleolithic times, from the early Stone Age. And I'm using house, probably shouldn't say house, I should probably say home. Somewhere where people stay. Don't forget, you don't have to stay in the same one. If you're a hunter-gatherer, you can move around, and if you're moving around, perhaps you need to find a new one of them wherever you go to. Then we have the Mesolithic home, the Middle Stone Age home. One of these is from the Middle Stone Age. Remember that in the Mesolithic period, people are still moving around, so you need a house that's movable. You either need to find a new house everywhere you go, so they need to kind of just be there, naturally, magically occurring houses that you don't have to make, or when you're a little bit more technically advanced, you can make a house that you can carry with you. Then we have the Neolithic time period. This is a point where we have people settling down, farming. Now they're not moving around. Now their houses don't have to be things they can carry with them, drafty little things or drafty things that they found to live in. You can build a proper house and you can stay there. When the Bronze Age period comes along, you've now got bronze tools. You can chop down trees and you can farm and you can produce much better materials for making a house. So your houses will improve. In the Iron Age, we've got the Celts, better tools, making more impressive houses. I've added the Romans. The Romans are not prehistory, they're history, but I'm using that as our endpoint. One of these houses was produced by the Romans being a much more technologically advanced people who did a lot of things that are actually quite like today. So one of those houses is the Roman period. Now, I've numbered the time periods and I've labelled the houses, but they are not in the right order. What you need to do for your piece of work today, please, is match the house to the time period, the home, I should say, to the time period that you think it goes with. So this first one here, no, where's the first one? A. Which home is this? And then B, we have this roundhouse here. It's not supposed to have a big hole in it, that's a cutout so that you can see what's inside, and you can see all the things like a loom for weaving and some bedding and all the interesting things inside. This one here is a type of tent with animal hides kind of put on the side of it. You can see the sticks poking out the top because it's made up of lots of sticks like that with hides put round it. This one here, D, that's a cave. Don't forget you can have more than one cave if you move around. E, this is a smaller roundhouse than this one. I know it's bigger picture, but that's a door that would fit a person, and that's a door that would fit a person. So you can see this B is much bigger than E. And then this roundhouse here, F, is a slightly simpler one made out of stone, which you might think, oh, that's more modern, but actually it's easier to find bits of stone than it is to cut trees down. So think about that. Think about the time period you think these go. Now, your piece of work is to match those together. Now, what I understand is not everybody's going to have a printer at home. Not everybody's going to be able to print this out and cut them out and stick them together. So here's our plan. You need to do some writing. You need to think about what order do those houses go. And then when you write down the order you think they go in, you need to tell me why. What does it have that makes it look more recent than the one that comes before it? So what makes it look modern? What's new and impressive about it compared to the last ones? What does it have that makes it look older than the one that comes after it? What makes it look less modern than the one that comes next? But also, and here's a very important thing in history, similar. Things change, but they change slowly. So what's it got that's similar to the ones around it? How do you know it goes there and not miles in front and not miles behind? You're looking for similarities. So this is what I want you to do. In your home learning book, I want you to put the date. I'd quite like you to write the learning objective, and I've forgotten my full stop there. And then I want you to go through the homes, one at a time, starting with one, the Paleolithic home, and then I want you to tell me which home you think it is. Now, if you've got a printer and you can cut out the picture, you can stick a picture in there. If you wanted to draw the picture, better than I have, you could draw it in there. Or it doesn't matter if you just do the writing on its own, but I do want the writing. You need to say, I think this is house, and then you tell me the letter of the house that you think is Paleolithic, because, and then you give me something you've noticed. And then you say, I think it goes before Y, the one that comes after it, because, I don't know, it's smaller, or it's got easier to make materials, or something like that. I think it goes after Z, or whichever house you think comes after, because it's bigger, or because I can see this inside it, or because these materials would only work in this time period, or because people need to move around and it's portable or something, because they're hunter-gatherers. I think it's near to this one because they're all the same shape, or they all use wood, or they all use wattle and daub, or they all use hay on top. You need to think of your reasons. And then you'll have a paragraph like that for each of the 6, I think it was. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah, 6 homes. Oh, that's me copy and pasting, because that's 5, well, that's 6, and that's 7. That was daft of me. You'll have to change that on your printouts, I've just noticed that. Okay, so that's going to be your work. 6 short paragraphs of writing telling me why you think each house goes in each time period. You can play back my video and listen to my description of the time periods again, because I did drop a few clues in there, a few things that might hint to you what people's houses were like. Now, today's Wednesday. You've got today to do this piece of work, and you've also got tomorrow if you need it, all the way up to 8 o'clock. But I would like to have it handed in by the assignment system by then. So please don't message it to me using the direct messages. Please don't write it as a comment. Please submit it in the assignment system. That way your teachers can see it, your teachers can comment on it, and then do check it afterwards in case they give you comments or feedback or anything that you need to do. Okay, hopefully this is a good bit of fun. If you've got any questions, you can write. That's when you can write underneath the post and ask me things, and I'll try and answer them as soon as I can. Or of course you can ask your teachers, and I'm sure they'll be able to help as well. Okay, thank you very much.